Welcome back on the channel, guys. This is a series about the King's Gambit. We're just getting closer. So this is the second move, bishop c5, also known as the classical variation. So what's the point of bishop c5? Black declines the gambit and instead develops a piece, makes white's kingside castling kind of problematic because he just wants to take on g1 followed by queen h4. And that basically forces white to move this knight all the way up to knight f3. So when we go with the third move, knight f3, we all of a sudden threaten this pawn on e5. Now they have following possibilities. They have the main line with d6, and they have a typically King's Gambit always possible move, e takes f4 and knight c6. In case of e takes f4, I'd say it's a relatively weak move because it gives us a strong center. So we just immediately push the pawn up all the way to the center. We go with d4, we attack that bishop, and more importantly, build up a strong game in the center. After bishop e7, you now get another tempo move, bishop f4, getting the pawn on f4 with tempo, and once again, with a strong center, with a little bit better development, since we have bishop on f4, knight on f3, and definitely more space, white already stands better. Now they have two options. To go with d6, which is kind of solid approach after knight c3, knight f6, bishop d3, castles, knight c6. It reminds me on what we had in the previous lesson. And after knight c6, you play a3. An idea of a3 is to prevent knight b4, to forever have like a pretty good control of the center, and anytime they play bishop g4, you just go back with the bishop on e3. Those two bishops in d3 and e3, they hold the pawn's structure and they hold his pawn, so white has a better position for sure. And after bishop e3, that's the way it is. Apart from that, there is a third move, knight c6. On knight c6, I'd like to emphasize one thing here. Don't take by pawn, even though most of you would do, because you threaten d4. Because of an interesting knight takes e5 by black. So if you go knight e5, queen h4, g3, queen e4, queen e2, queen h1, knight g6 gives you nothing after knight e7, because once you take on h8, you just have to accept the truth. Sooner or later, that knight on h8 is weak, and it won't be able to come out. So after knight c6, you just go with a fourth move, knight e5. That's a very important accuracy here. So when they go with the knight e5, boom, d4. Who would say that you go with the d4 and you get a fantastic position? Reminds me of some variation of Rai Lopez 4 knights. So when you go with d4, you attack both of these pieces, bishop on c5 and knight on e5, and there we go. By the way, don't forget, if you take on e5, you lose on the spot. Please don't make this kind of mistake, because I've seen so many games like this in the past, and king e2 is even mate, while at the same time g3 you lose the rook on h1. So in order I apologize. In order to not make mistake like this, you gotta go with d4. And after d4, if they move the bishop, if they take, for example, you just capture, and now this knight cannot even move because g7 is gonna drop. Any queen h4, you just go queen f2, and you're always happy to get a game with an open center and the bishop pair. What has to be a lot better. Apart from that, bishop e6, you just take on e5, d6, and go a4, harassing the bishop on b6, getting some space, maybe some rook a3 afterwards, but in general, white is a lot better. Although, once again, you gotta remember, they take by knight, and when they take, boom, you just go with d4. Those are two most important things if they play knight c6. And that basically means they have to go with d6. Here we have two equally good opportunities. For all of you who are just in love with the bishop's opening and those type of positions, I'm suggesting and giving you an alternative with knight c3. White simply develops this knight and has some ideas of playing bishop c4, d3, f5, or even at some point going for knight a4 and knight c5, trying to get rid of that bishop, or just in case of black making short castle, doing bishop c4, d3, f5, and launching a queenside attack. You just have to know that these positions are relatively good ones. In case of knight f6, bishop c4, knight c6, this is all, you know, subject of my butcher with the bishop's opening course. And you also have like 3 videos here about the bishop's opening and many more where I played games and practically tried those stuff. Here, white will often attempt a slow build up in the center and the king side, and can also harass the bishop on c5 by knight a4. Although I believe that that's just one option, because you know that in my course, Butcher with a bishop's opening, I did queen g3 because I like to sack this rook, and I won, I believe, almost all the games that I ever played in this type of a system. That's one option. Although, as a typical King's Gambit player, I'm here to suggest you typical King's Gambit type of move. So instead of knight c3, you can go with c3. The simple point behind c3 is that you want to break in the center and play d4. That's certainly white's most ambitious option, aiming to gain control of the center. Black has to know that after d4, he actually has like zillions of possibilities here, and my job here will be to show you all these kinds of things. So let's go. You go with a pretty ambitious c3. You'd like to build up an attack in the center by pushing d4, and black has following possibilities. Most common thing in practice is knight f6, another developing move. There are sidelines such as f5, queen e7, bishop b6, knight c6, bishop b4. Let's take a look at every single one of those. If f5, you just take on e5, and when they recapture, you just go with d4. And when they take, a shockingly strong move for white is e5. That's very interesting. Gives white unbelievably pleasant type of the game. And here I found like 2 kinds of games. In case of knight a7, we just play c takes, bishop d2, recapturing by queen, going with the knight c3, pinning this one, castles, rook a c1, and after rook f to d1, I found a game between David Bronstein and some computer back to 1994. White enjoyed space, David Bronstein managed to win this game, and this was a relatively good one. In case of 7th move, knight c6, where they just try to hold the pawn on d4, we go with the bishop b5, and by pinning this knight, we'd like to take on d4 and build up a strong center. When they go d3, you go b4, kick this bishop away in order to get a pawn back by bishop. So after knight g7, a4, knight a3, your knight goes on c4 in order to harass the dark square bishop. After bishop e6, knight c4, you kick the knight away and control the full center. And now, after knight b8, a very lovely move. This is an email game from 2019. He just pushed the pawn up to b6. This way, he either closes the dark square bishop or just creates a weak pawn structure with a strong passed pawn. Also, with his bishop pair, white is so much better, and he managed to win the game soon after. So just like you see that move f5 is some sort of like counter gambit by black, that doesn't seem to be working. Then there is a line with the queen e7. Makes sense. Wants to get like better control of the e5 pawn, and at the same time to say, how dare you to play d4? And the guy says, I do dare to play no matter what you think about it. So he goes with e4, e takes, and let's take a look at this one. Because most of you, I know that my having problems with the queen e4, and at least you would say, if he played queen e7, he probably knows what he's doing. So let me just go with, I don't want to go with e4. But the thing is, when they go queen e4, you just place your king on f2, threaten bishop e5 check, followed by rook e1, lining up the queen and the king, and also threatening that bishop on c5. It's immediately winning. Another thing is instead of that, bishop b6. On bishop e6, you just go knight c3. At some point, not immediately, you would like to go with the knight d5. They go knight f6 and you kick the knight away. So when they play castles, because you can't do it since the king is pinned, you just go bishop e2. They go knight f2 d7, knight d5 threatening bishop and queen, queen e8, short castle, and here white enjoys a lot more space. Let me just show you the game between Keller and Friedrich, correspondence game back to 1976. The guy said, okay, you have a strong center, let me just break it. The guy said, okay, I don't care, I just want to put all my pieces into the attack. He goes h6 to stop the great gift type of ideas connected with bishop h7, knight g5, and queen h5. This guy says, okay, f5, let's go, all in. I don't care about my center. Capturing first pawn. f6, capturing second pawn. Taking on g7, and what a lovely finish of the game. After bishop h6, black couldn't take on h6. He actually resigned because this mate was just forced. Lovely game after queen e7, and that's why when you play like d4 and they capture, they gotta give you check. You go with the king on f2. A very important move. You move your king from the pin, and you'd like to go with knight c3 afterwards. Also, at the moment, take a look at this one. You threaten queen a4 to win the piece. They gotta go with, for example, if bishop d7, you develop one piece, you develop knight, and you're just doing great. How do you want to play here? You just need to play rook e1, followed by king g1, artificial castle. If knight g1, king g1, c6, queen b3, I found a game played in Liverpool, 2008, where Canop beat Turner like this, just played f5 and came up with this h3. This guy instantly resigned because he didn't have place for the knight, and once again, full control of the dark squares and on the king side. Then, instead of queen e7, they can go with bishop e6. I even found in some articles that black has to know to play bishop f6, to play bishop e6. I disagree. You take on e5, and you just say, okay, knight a3. This is what you have to know. To go with the knight on a3 and to go on c4, harassing both pawn on e5 and bishop on b6. In case of bishop g4, knight c4, knight c6, d3, and now you harass that bishop on b6. a5, bishop c5, b4, bishop d6, bishop e2. White has a lot better development, a lot more space. He's got a pretty good game on the queen side, and I believe with the bishop pair as well. So white is aiming to open up the game. Somehow white was so much better, and he managed to win this game in just a few moves. After castles, bishop e3, f5, b5, castles, captured, bishop f3, played a6, this guy captured, played rook to b1, and just like you see, white with the bishop pair enjoyed to play against absolutely broken pawn structure, 4 pawn islands, and also these bishops were doing great. At the same time, bishop on d6 was under the attack by knight on c4 and queen on d1. Instead, after knight a3, they can go with knight f6. You still sack the pawn, and after knight e4, queen e2. You're not threatened to win this pawn. They cannot give you check because of king d1, and all you want to do is just king c2, d3, and one of these two minor pieces is about to drop. So they gotta go with knight f6. You take on e5, bishop e6. You want to go after the bishop on e6. I found a game from 2020. This is a correspondence game. The guy came up with this a little bit funny. Bishop f2, king d1, hiding the king there. Knight e6, took on c7, brought it back, and with the bishop pair, relatively safe king. White, and also pawn up, which is also like very important. And on top of all that, way better and healthier pawn structure. Zvak beat Tilechek in an email game. It was played 2 years ago. So just like you see, all those lines, bishop b6, f takes, d takes, knight a3, they simply have to go with the 6th move, knight c6. We go bishop e5, threatening on e5. They gotta play knight f6, going after the e4 pawn. d3, and now we're also checking a beautiful correspondence game. The guy went for knight c4, threatens even better on e5 after he takes on c6, but in that case it would just open up the game and give them bishop pair. So after bishop e6, bishop g5. An important move to slow down a little bit development by black. After h6, bishop h4, bishop c4, a pure advantage with the bishop pair. And just when you think all the time that bishop pair, the guy decided to take on f6, go with a4, b4, and a5, and right after rook f1, queen e2, launch the attack with g4. He now went with a5, went with g5, and eventually destroyed black in a very, very nice and quite typical game where that it showed, you know, like how important it is to have that light square bishop and the diagonal, and to always try to take advantage of the open f-file, which is also typical for the bishops opening in this type of games. If they go for knight c6, it just transposes into the other line. So after d4, he takes. If bishop b4, you just play knight c3 with a full center, and I told you keep the center like this, with e5, of course, and white is doing better. Or in case of bishop b6, you just have to go with, once again, a very logical and good game, control of the center, bishop e3, bishop d3, and white is just better. Bishop g4 brings them nothing. I usually teach my students, don't defend pawns by pinning the knights. So after like f takes, d takes, queen a4 check, they cannot play knight c6 because of knight e5. They gotta go on queen d7, bishop b5, c6, knight e5 is just much better for you, and it just forces like all these exchanges, which definitely forces and gives advantage to white. Queen a4, bishop d7, queen c2, b4, and that knight a3 always shows and turns out to be one of the key resources by white to get some advantage. So just like you see, you have a nice game and development on the queen side, and on top of all that, you chase the dark square bishop. And finally, on knight f6. On knight f6, you play d4, building up a strong center. They gotta take. If they move the bishop away, chase the bishop. They take on e5, take by knight, and play bishop g5. They have problems to claim some sort of compensation for the given pawn. This is why they have to take on d4. And when they take on d4, you recapture, and they gotta go back to b6. If bishop b4, you always protect with bishop d2. Don't forget, you can't protect yourself like this because the central pawn would fall. So after bishop d2, knight bd2, bishop goes on d3, and all you want to do, any c5, d5, any bishop g4, you just develop yourself normally. And in case of knight c6, you just play short castle. An easy game, nice game, good control of the center, and you just want to break in the center with e5. After bishop b6, knight c3 castles, this is one of the most critical positions for the whole variation and estimation of the whole line. You just break in the center by kicking this knight away with e5. They gotta take, and you take by f-pawn. Why? You open up this bishop so it can go on this diagonal, but usually it goes just on, for example, g5. That's like very important point. Another thing is you just open up f-file for your actions. So after like knight e5, bishop g5, it goes after the queen on d8. So what's the point? If they go with f6, you just have bishop c4, you just take bishop h6, and I found a game that was played in New York 1965 where Saddles beat Addison like this. Much better development. He put the queen on d2, connected his rooks, and made it black. Instead of that, if they go for queen d7, you just go bishop c4, queen b3 threatening that knight. They defend the knight by pinning our knight, and also after this, cannot beat Ledger in Sunningdale 2007 in England. So take a look at this one. Strong center, good control with these bishops, with this queen on this diagonal, open f-file, pressure on f7, and white was already much better in 14 moves. That's why they have to take and move the queen. So where to move the queen? I found a game where the guy played queen e8, which is not a good move. You play bishop d3 and played f6. A beautiful move, and the refutation of this is castles. So if they take, you just take, threatening on h7, take by queen, gave check, came up with this check, and this one was good enough to finish this guy off. Why? All white pieces were participating on the king side and into the attack. And after queen d5, I'm going to show you my fantastic novelty to refute this queen d5 option. Bishop d3. If knight e6, develop bishop here, play queen c2 or queen b1 followed by castles. Queen e2 here to threaten bishop c4 and go after the queen and the king. And after this, short castle. What is so much better, control of the center is fine. All of them played bishop g4. And now, move is queen c2. You threaten on h7 and you don't care. They don't have time to take on f3. You take, they threaten the rook. You first give check and go back defending the rook. Move your bishop back here, go and harass this queen, and after rook g3, they can't stop. Queen g2, followed by rook h3, or bishop g5, going after the queen and the weak king. That's why they have to play h6, and I have a novelty for you here as well. Boom, bishop h6. And after that, queen d2, queen c6. By the way, take a look at this one. Queen e6, boom, knight g5. What a move. Queen e7, bang, knight h7. You want to go on f6, buddy. Knight e7 and knight f6, which threatens knight f6 with mate. This guy had to go for a queen c6, short castle, knight e7, and here either rook a to e1 or king h1, placing the king in safety, going with a d5 and bishop h7 discovery, knight h4, queen f4, harassing this bishop, king side, weakening this one, and white is just so much better. Hope that you enjoyed in this presentation and looking forward to finish the King's Gambit series, 2 more videos. All the best and subscribe on the channel and like it and keep up with the nations. Bye bye.